Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
My name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go, Josh.
I loved it.
Did you really?
Oh yeah, it's an amazing
Okay.
movie. It's probably coming out of it. I just saw it again yesterday. We're talking about Avengers Endgame. If you haven't read the title of your podcast, but I just saw it again yesterday, and coming out of it, like you just have this amazing feeling coming out of this movie. And I think I don't know. I was trying to determine whether this or Us is my favorite movie of the year so far, but they're different things. They do different things, but I would much rather rewatch this movie than rewatch Us, because Us is like a thing you got to focus in on, whereas this movie is just, it's like, bubblegum. It's awesome. What you loved it too, I guess?
I did love it. And it's the movie that has brought us back together.
Yeah, that's right.
For the last couple podcasts, we have disagreed in mature ways, but we have disagreed. I like your little descriptions of our podcast, how we argue and there's a conflict and it sounds like so dramatic. And then I re-listen to it and I'm like, we sound pretty logical.
Nah.
He just feels differently than I do.
You got to get the butts in the seats.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I walked into this going, I'm connected to these characters. I've spent 11 years. I've seen every one of these movies. I've seen every one of these movies multiple times with the exception of Iron Man 3. And that's just because I never got around to it. I didn't have as much interest in seeing it again, but I have seen snips and pieces of it since then, but not all the way through. So I'm connected to these characters. And there's no way that what happens in this movie couldn't affect somebody like us, because we are connected and we have vested interest in these characters. I don't know whether or not it's a good movie. I don't know whether or not it's a good narrative. I don't know whether or not it's great directing, great cinematography. I don't know any of that stuff. All I know is every time something happened, I whispered it to myself like, this is what's going to happen. And then I got excited for a split second and then it happened. And you're like, how could it have happened any other way than that?
Yeah.
I have some small little issues, but that's only because I wanted things to be like, we'll get right into it. The beginning of the film, I was really impressed that the Russo brothers took their time. They took their time. There's not an epic battle for the first 25 minutes of the film, give or take. Nothing action adventure happens for a good 20 minutes. And in a way, I loved it because there is a lot going on. It's back to the leftovers and the rapture and people missing, and all of a sudden they're missing. Those stories have something in common in the fact that what would we do as the people left over? That's an interesting story to me. The stories of the rapture are interesting to me, not because of the Christian connotation, but because what would you do if you were left behind? And they spend good amount of time exploring that and what happens to these characters and what happens 5 years later and what are the ramifications. I loved it. I will say that when we get to the end of the film, I wish they had done a little less in the beginning so we could have gotten a little bit more at the end. That said, it's a small, minor complaint. It's not even a complaint. It's just that when you get to that last epic battle, I just wanted, not that I needed more, but I thought to myself, well, maybe they could have spent 3 more minutes on Black Panther if they had only done 10 minutes in the beginning, or if they had spent 15 less minutes in the time traveling sequences. Maybe we could have gotten this amount of Spider-Man at the end. But I don't even know if that's a legitimate finger quote complaint, because how do you get it all in at the end? How do you do that?
Well, I think that we do need to say, kind of like right off the bat, that we're gonna spoil the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, we both loved it. So, I mean, if you came to hear that, then that's what that is. And so from here on out, we're definitely going to spoil the movie. I think that from what you're saying, the epic battle at the end, if you watch the 2 movies, Infinity War and Endgame, back to back, then you get a lot of epic battle sequences in Infinity War. And looking at them like a single story, I would think there may be a little bit of kind of like epic battle fatigue. And I think they might have gotten to the point where I'm sure they shot a bunch of stuff and I'm sure they trimmed a bunch of stuff. And you're right, they probably trimmed a bunch of stuff from the battle at the end. But I think the stuff that they kept was so iconic and was so character driven, as opposed to the things that they were doing in Infinity War, which was just like how many things can we kill in the shortest amount of time. Whereas this the battle scene at the end, which we're not necessarily going to jump there, I don't think, for the rest of the podcast, but the battle scene at the end was something that was more character driven and was more like kind of like hot potato game type thing, but it also allowed different characters to be the focus without having to just see like a bunch of characters standing around killing a bunch of things, which, like I said, we just saw in Infinity War in a very similar situation. It's dusk and there's a bunch of debris around, as opposed to it being daylight and then being in a beautiful Wakandan field. But that's there's really not much of a difference between those. They're even fighting the same types of beings in the two different fights. So I think that they did, for me, I think that they did a good job of differentiating the battle scene at the end of Infinity War and the battle scene at the end of this film. I love the beginning with Hawkeye and with his family, because it puts you right back into that feeling that you had at the end of Infinity War. And if you're somebody who hasn't seen Infinity War since it came out in the theater, then you're going to immediately remember what it felt like at the end of that movie, and it puts you right back in that position right at this moment that you're seeing the movie, and it gets you into that correct mindset to see how Black Widow, how Captain America, how they're dealing with it, especially like right off the bat. And then you obviously see Tony and Nebula kind of stranded in their spaceship and just not even, they're just given up at this point. The other thing I thought was interesting is they didn't keep the Captain Marvel beeper scene in the movie. Like, they didn't have that in this movie. We don't necessarily know that the reason why Captain Marvel is there to save them is because Captain Marvel came to Earth first, and everybody kind of briefed her on like where Tony Stark and Nebula are, and you need to go get them. But it's still, I don't know. I thought that was interesting that they had that as a end credit sequence in Captain Marvel, and it just wasn't even really mentioned in this one. But it still did what it needed to do. It got everybody. It got the main few people back together. Well, especially just Cap and Iron Man back together, and then it kind of kicked off the rest of the film. But did you expect the 5 years later cut? Did you? I mean, I know we've seen the trailer and a little bit of like things have devolved in the world since the snap, but I thought that the 5 years later thing was fairly bold, a fairly bold thing to do.
Well, I think that it's appropriate on some kind of level because they can't spend the next 20, 30 minutes establishing 5 years going by. You don't need to do that. And the screenwriter and the director and the actors probably have some say in some of their character development or how things should move. And because you have these expert actors and you have Academy Award nominees and Academy Award winners playing these parts, all you have to do is give one line of what happened in the last 5 years, and you understand everything that happened to that character. You understand where Black Widow is at. You understand that she needs a job and she needs a focus and she needs to be running this crew. These out in space crew members, if you will, Captain Marvel, Rhodey, Rocket, all those
It's
people.
kind of like the leftover Avengers.
Yeah, exactly. And it sort of cleans the slate for the original ones to take over, which I thought was really smart that they did that they stuck with the original Avengers as the main plot line of this movie. And then, of course, Ant-Man comes in and stuff like that, but that made sense too. So I don't have a problem with the 5 year jump. I do want to go back to one thing about spoilers. I keep seeing these things online, reviews that say spoiler free review of Endgame. I don't know how you do that.
You can't.
I really don't. I really don't know. I haven't read any because I don't read a whole lot of reviews before we do the podcast, unless I have so many questions about the movie and I need some kind of justification for why I felt what I felt, whether it be I liked it more than most people say or I disliked it more than most people say. I will I will read the top two on Metacritics of the like whatever the 100% or 80%, the highest scores, and then I'll read the bottom two and I'll kind of get an understanding where most people are coming from. but I don't read a whole lot of reviews. So I haven't read these spoiler-free reviews, and I hope I didn't give anything away in the beginning of the podcast because I don't like to do that, but I just don't know how you talk about this movie and not talk about the fact that Ant-Man comes back in a very kind of simple way. I mean, almost a haphazard kind of way, which I thought was great. I mean, it doesn't have to be this complicated thing. It's a simple accident, a happenstance, if you will. And he comes back. And we don't need anything other than that. So your question was about the 5-year jump. I don't have a problem with that because it allows these characters to be textured and tanned even more because they haven't been able to do anything and they're superheroes. There's instantaneous gratification by going and having Captain Marvel fly out to space and grab Tony and Nebula and bring them back. Done, you know, over and done with. So to actually have to spend 5 years wondering and pondering, and then it also adds to people like the now new Professor Hulk and Tony Stark with these genius mindsets. It proves that no matter what your intellect is, sometimes you can't figure out the answer in a split second. And in these movies, that happens a lot. Well, what if we cross this with this and this beam with that beam? And if we go through this quantum realm and this time, blah, 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 and then it's solved, and you're like, okay, hold on a second. You know, let's do a little bit more investigation in this world of how this would work. So 5 years passing sums that up without having to spend the time.
Yeah, well, and you notice that with Tony Stark and Professor Hulk, they kind of go in opposite directions. Tony goes into seclusion, whereas the Professor Hulk version goes into this kind of like super social media instant gratification type of I'll take pictures with you. I'm just gonna live it up. I'm gonna be this kind of face of a superhero, and I'm just gonna bring joy to kids' lives. And I'm not saying that he's playing up the fact that he's the Hulk versus the fact that he's a scientist, and he's just kind of like figured out some sort of like middle ground to be at peace with both sides of him. But I don't know how much of the scientist side is really coming out. There's some hilarious scenes, and it's great that they're able to add those in before it gets real serious, like with Hulk trying to figure out time travel and not being able to really do it in as elegant a way as Tony Stark can. But those were some great scenes, and I love that that's the more, I guess, classical humor versus the Thor Ragnarok style humor, which we still have in this movie. We haven't even gotten to Thor yet, but that style humor, which is it's a little bit different, and I see why they're taking Thor to that direction, and it sounds like Chris Hemsworth has had a lot to do with that too. He's kind of helped to push that way because he felt bad about Thor: The Dark World, which I guess you said you liked, but
I just don't understand why that is the one that everybody beats up on. Why does there always have to be one film in a trilogy or in a series that people just have to hate it? Is because we can't stand to love something so much that we gotta find something. It's not that bad of a movie. And as a matter of fact, I think the Russo brothers agree with me because
exactly.
right, because they utilize it.
Yes, of
And
course.
they bring back two people, one in not a prominent role and one in a prominent role, and we'll get there in just a little bit because I think they're trying to say, here's your middle fingers fandoms to Dark World. Like, get off our backs. It's not that bad of a movie. Let me go back to the Professor Hulk thing, and I know that this is probably a little too analytical and a little too serious for a comic book movie, but I think this is why people are attracted to these stories and they like these characters. It's that everybody has a sense of who they are inside themselves and who they want to be to the outside world. And sometimes it takes a long time to blend those two in this world. I'm talking about real human beings. And I think that when Professor Hulk decides to stop fighting the green guy, and then the green guy decides to stop fighting the scientist, that they can blend the two worlds together. Now he's comfortable with himself. So I don't know if he's so much into the fandom of the Twitter world and autographs and all that other stuff and Instagram. I think he's happy with himself now. And so it's a metaphor for how people should be in this world. And I know that that's reading a lot into it, but I think that's why people love these characters, because people struggle in real life. And to go to a movie to see somebody who has the ultimate struggle to where if they get so angry, they destroy things literally and can kill people with just a heartbeat going too fast. When you finally get to a place where you accept both of those two sides of yourself, it's a great way to say, as a human being, we can become that. And these heroes and these mythic creatures that we create are just wishful thinking to our human psyche. So that's why I love that. And plus, he looks great as the Incredible Hulk, as Professor Hulk. Like people, there's a whole thing on Twitter about how hot he is, and they're right, first of all. But it's just nice to see. It's just nice to see somebody who's like at peace with who they are.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing I wanted to bring up is from a technical standpoint, Hulk up until this point, Hulk as Hulk has not looked as good as Professor Hulk looks in this movie. And I know it's probably advancements in CGI and, motion capture and face capture, but there's more Mark Ruffalo in this Professor Hulk, obviously, since it's a blend of the two, than there has been in all the other Hulks that I've seen in the MCU. And the ability for them to replicate his facial gesticulations and what his face looks like, you can see the acting through, I mean, not in a bad way, you can see his emotions through his face in this movie. And I think that's a huge feat because that's really difficult to do because it doesn't look like all like Mark Ruffalo's head or Mark Ruffalo's face, but there's enough of that in there. And we've talked a bunch about bad CGI, bad face replacement, bad things like Rogue One and all that, where it just doesn't work. Before the movie, they played the Gemini Man trailer. Did they do that for you too?
No, I've seen the trailer, but I don't think I saw it before the movie.
On a big screen, you see this trailer, and the young Will Smith looks fine until he starts to talk, and it all falls apart. But I didn't get that with Hulk in this movie. I didn't get that with. I don't think any of the CGI characters. Thanos was amazing, but like Hulk, even things like the shine of the light off of his teeth, like little things like that. When you really start to look at that, it looks realistic, and that's just it's an amazing feat to be able to do that nowadays. I can't imagine the amount of time and energy that went into that, and it paid off. So yeah, I mean, I think the Professor Hulk character was great in this movie, and I didn't know there was a precedent for it in the comics, but subsequently I've read about it, and it's like, oh, that's so cool how they're able to really pay tribute to that stuff.
Everything that people wished for came true.
Mm.
They wished for time travel, so Tony and his father, they wished for Professor Hulk. They just wished for all these things. They wished for now we did say spoilers, so I'm jumping into it.
Yeah, yeah.
They wished for Gwyneth Paltrow in the suit. They wished for all of the women to be together at one point in the movie. They wished for all of these things, and they did it. And they found a narrative that suited this extremely well. That must have been difficult. It must have been many waking nights trying to figure out, okay, if we move this piece to put this person here, how do we move this to put, and what they did is they were smart. They stripped it down. What is it? Christopher Marcus,
Stephen McFeely.
Yeah. And there's 3 other credits on IMDb, but I'm not looking at them right now.
Well, it's
but
probably
anyway,
Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and all those guys. Yeah, it is.
it must have been like an aha moment when they said, probably before Infinity War, we need to strip this back down to the original Avengers. And what it did is it freed them from any trappings of other characters. And not that that would have probably been that difficult to do, but it brought it back. And when you're having this big epic movie that's ending 11 years of stories, if you will, at least 11 years of one person's story being Iron Man, it's so smart to make it minimal, because then once it becomes huge at the end, you're like, oh, wow. But they were smart not to try to integrate all that stuff. And when they started to, I'd heard rumors about time travel, and I'd heard rumors. We talked about the quantum realm. We talked about Doctor Strange. We talked about Ant-Man. We talked about a lot of different possibilities. And then when I heard about time travel, I thought, well, that's really good, because if it's for real in that world, then I will buy into it because I'm a Star Trek fan and time travel is a huge thing and paradox is a huge thing and what you do in the past and all this other stuff. And there's all these questions. And of course, you're a Back to the Future fan, which is great that that came up because as a little kid, now I'm not a little kid, I'm a middle aged man, but inside my little kiddom, I'm thinking, well, what about Back to the Future? Why can't you use that theory? And then they bring it up in the movie as debunking it and making it kind of a character thing for Scott Lang. I
That's a
love that.
problem that
I
I have
love
because
that.
they don't debunk Back to the Future because they essentially are using Back to the Future 2 as a template for what they're doing. So it's not that doesn't make sense to me. That's one of my like three gripes with this movie. But anyway,
Only because you love that movie,
I
though.
do
Like,
love
would you
that
have thought
movie.
twice about that? But the point to all that is that time travel is a great way to solve a lot of these issues. And what it did was not only solve a lot of issues of how to get the stones back, but it brought you back to all of these worlds from the last 11 years. And you're thinking, okay, back to Dark World. If I had not seen Natalie Portman, I would have been a little disappointed.
Hmm.
I am just a little disappointed that she didn't come back to do a cameo, that this is reused stuff from Dark
Is
World.
it reused footage?
Yeah, that's what I read. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, that's what I read. And I think that's why there's nothing more than it's just a throwaway. I mean, it's not even really a cameo. The hallway scene, you can't really even tell it's her, but that is her coming in to do a voiceover for that. So she did come in
Oh, cool.
for new stuff.
Because I thought at one point she said she would never do a Marvel movie ever again.
Well, see, that's what's interesting about this. That's what's thrilling. And then she showed up at the premiere and everybody flipped out and she said nothing. She just posed with, Brie Larson and she posed with Scarlett Johansson and she just did her little Hollywood thing, never said a word. She was not doing interviews, nothing. And see, that's what the brilliance is she never came out and said, and I just did a lot of reading about this. She never came out and said, I will never do a movie again. It became this thing that wasn't true. What she said was after the Dark World that she thought she was done. That if
Mm.
they asked her back, she would come back, but
Oh.
she assumed she was done. And the other great thing that I think that they've done is, especially in this movie, connecting all of the last 11 years, it's not a gimmick to show Natalie Portman because she's an Academy Award winning actress and she was in one of the movies. She has been consistently talked about as a character throughout these movies. There's a joke in the first Avengers film, there's a joke in the second Avengers film, and there's a mention about how they don't have their women around them in, I think it's the third Avenger film. I'm not sure which one it is. It's not the second one. Anyway, the point is that Jane has been with us for since Thor, the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
And she is a character that has come with us, whether or not she's on screen or not. So to do that little cameo is great. And the other thing that I think they did when they reintroduced Renee Russo, who's great, I
Mm-hmm.
love her, is they allowed more character development in a character that has been kind of criticized as not really developed as well because there's this whole female thing with the Marvel universe that they're not utilizing and they haven't developed these female characters enough. And after 11 years, only one female lead. There's a lot of discussion about that. And I understand that side of it. But then they bring her back and they don't bring Thor back to talk to Odin, his father. They bring him back to talk to his mother. And then she says the coolest things like, I was raised by witches and I see with more than just my eyes. And all in that instant, a lot of things about her that you didn't know before. And it's an extremely sweet and well acted scene. And it's got this nice little comedy levity to it. And it's just really well done. And it reminds you that she was a prominent part of this world. And we needed to see her again to end this world or this 11-year saga, if you will. So I thought that was, plus, it's an ode to Dark World. So screw you all.
Well, the last thing that she says to him is eat a salad, which brings up the fact that we have Fat Thor. Did anyone ever imagine that there would be a Fat Thor? And did we know that Fat Thor would be so awesome?
I had no idea that they were going to do Fat Thor, but and I will say this before we start discussing it. There has been some fat shaming issues with this. That the fat guy is the comic relief, and I get that side of it. I've had weight issues my whole entire life. I can understand that, but for me personally, I wasn't sensitive to that, and I don't want to be insensitive to somebody who might have been offended by that.
Before you say anything more, I just wanted to bring up the fact that this is a character that was known for being just super muscular and svelte and all that stuff, and he's let himself go to he doesn't have the or didn't have the same difficulties with weight management, and for this reason it's a marker that shows how that affected his psyche and what he allowed himself to do. And I think that it's in some ways it's easier to deal with that. That's such a serious thing, and they do give it serious time on screen. But it's also a way to deal with his emotions, like as an audience.
I will say this. I think you're exactly right. I think what we're seeing is post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing depression. I think we're seeing anxiety. That's what we're seeing. And for me, because I was extremely overweight when I was in high school, so for me, what I didn't feel a sense of shame towards a fat person or towards a person who's larger. What I felt was anxiety because this god of thunder has lost his way. So when you see him chunky and he does his buffoonish stuff, you're not laughing at him being fat. For me, you're laughing at the anxiety of that he's going through, and you don't know how to relieve that anxiety. So it comes out in humor. We have a tendency to laugh at things that we don't understand, and I don't mean by pointing your finger at somebody, but do you understand what I'm saying? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I laughed out of being uncomfortable for his disposition. That's what I did.
And you notice that Hulk didn't laugh. And I mean, it was one of those things where it's not like Hulk looked at him and is like, "Oh my gosh, you're so fat. I can't believe you're so fat," and is just making, horrible jokes about him, to his face at that moment. He understands what that scenario is. But the other thing about Thor is that they kept him at the same weight throughout the film, and he was a
Mm-hmm.
capable warrior at that
Right.
weight.
And see,
So how is that fat shaming? Because that is actually fat empowerment.
well, not only that, but there was no like training scene to get Thor back into shape. There was
Exactly.
no like exercising scene and no flash dance sequence where he was exercising with Rocket and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. There was none of that. And there was no bolt of lightning that all of a sudden made him back into the shape that he was.
Although a bolt of lightning did, it braided his beard though. That was kind of crazy.
I kind of liked that though. I liked it because they didn't shave him. They didn't give him back to his original look. You
Yeah.
see him for what he is at this time. So yeah, I agree. I'm not saying I think you can splinter things off and find issues with almost everything in this life, let alone this movie. I just don't want people to think that we're not aware of, or I'm not aware of, that people might feel that way about this. I don't want to make light of it. I I understand why somebody would be upset and be sensitive to that, but for me personally, having these issues, I didn't feel that way. I felt sad for him that he was so affected. Well, I mean, everybody he knows is dead.
Yeah.
Everybody, with the exception of Valkyrie and a lot of TT's character.
Oh, Korg.
Yes, thank you. Except for the outliers of his story, everybody is dead, like for real dead, not just like fake dead. It's an interesting thing that they did.
Yeah.
Because you would think that somebody who is a god would be able to overcome this. And that's why it's kind of soul crushing that
Yeah.
these characters can't handle this, and they're superheroes.
Yep. It shows vulnerability in it. You're right. It does show how
Right.
it's kind of a levelizer. This snap is a levelizer for everyone. It causes everyone to retreat. It causes Tony to retreat instead of, giving of his, time and energy and mind towards bettering the world. He retreats to a beautiful lakeside cabin and has a family. And I'm not saying that that's, bad, but he does struggle with that at the point when he can't let it go, that he may have the ability, he may have the key to bring all of these people back, and he just can't get it out of his head, even though his daughter loves him 3,000.
Mm, that's a cute kid, man. It's a cute kid. She's so adorable.
She's very cute. So we haven't talked about Ronin yet, and the Ronin version of Hawkeye, or is it a different character? I'm not really sure as far as the comic books are concerned, but you can see how the Barton character would be driven to something like that, where once again, like Thor, everyone he knows, everyone in his family is gone, and he has nothing, and so he's looking for a way to deal with his pain, and he deals with his pain with aggression, and with aggression against people who he has now become the one and only arbiter of justice on. So we get to see a little bit of a fight scene there with him and the actor Hiroyuki Sanada, who I was like, where have I seen that guy before? But I had just watched Sunshine within the last year, and he's in that. Of course, there's like a bunch of people that are in Sunshine that are also in this movie. Benedict Wong, who plays Wong, is in that movie. Chris Evans is in that movie. There's all kinds of actors in that movie. But anyway, he was in that. He was also in Wolverine. And, he had like a little bitty cameo in there. But well, we get to see Nat come and kind of bring Ronan back, bring Hawkeye back, and that's a real touching scene, which sets up things later on. Did you notice the necklace that she was wearing when they went to talk to Tony Stark initially before they went to Hulk? I noticed it this second time, and then I read up a little bit about it, and it looks like everybody kind of agrees that she was wearing a small, like a very thin necklace that had an arrow on it. And so I thought that was kind of a nice little tribute to like her relationship, her friendship with Hawkeye, that she's thinking about him at least. And she's got that little arrow on her necklace. So once everybody gets back together, then they do the whole like Ocean's 11 time heist planning. I thought they did that pretty well, where they were able to kind of bounce back and forth, and you give Thor a little bit of time to be awkward and for everybody to kind of just like look at each other and just be like, okay, well, this is not going well. And we bounce back and forth. But the coolest thing about that was the fact that they were able to smash three of the stones together. I thought that was really ingenious from a plot standpoint, because if you were having to go out to 6 different places with whatever 10 different people or 8 different people, that would have just been a mess. But they were able to, from a narrative standpoint, consolidate it down to essentially 3 groups of people, because the Morag couple and the Vormir couple kind of go off. They're kind of together initially, but I thought that was really really cool, a way for them to condense that down. And I did check last night when I was watching the movie. They go to the like start the time heist at about an hour into the movie. So we've had an hour of, like you said, stuff that wasn't like too much action packed, a couple little bitty scenes, but really it's been an hour of setup for the second act. Essentially, that's kind of like the act break there. So I thought that was interesting how they still use a similar act structure in this movie, where it's 1 hour per act, and it lined up pretty well. I thought that was crazy that they were able to condense all that stuff down.
My question is this: did they know this whole entire time that it was going to end this way? How long did they know? Because were the original Infinity Stones set up in time and space in the other movies to correlate with this later on, or did they figure that out later? Like, did somebody say, "Hey, technically, if you go back to this year in these 11 years, the Infinity Stones are all on Earth. 3 of them are. So we
Yeah,
could just have them time travel back to that." Or was it set up like that so they could do that in this movie?
I think Thor has the Tesseract. The first Thor has the Tesseract. So at that point, they possibly were laying the beginnings of a groundwork of Infinity Stones. And then you had Thanos at the end of Avengers. So I think by Avengers they were set.
Right, because he does. Yeah, I'll do it myself. Yeah, you're right. He does. Well, I see that kind of stuff, regardless of how you feel about these movies, have to light you up as a film goer, as a film
Yep.
watcher, because it's just really smart. It's just smartly done. It just is. And everybody can say, it's superficial, it's a comic book movie, whatever. It's still intricate. It's still well woven together. And what could happen versus what does happen, whether or not they go back and then they see themselves in that whole scene Smash. And then he goes over and he pretends.
He's not
That's
feeling it.
brilliant. Right. That's brilliant because even if you've not seen, I can't imagine seeing this movie and not seeing the other films.
No.
Somebody from Alamo Drafthouse had never seen any of the Marvel films. And I think somebody at Alamo Drafthouse required them to go see Endgame and review it based on never seeing anything else. They took kind of a tongue in cheek approach to it and, talked about things like how good looking Professor Hulk is, and the Captain America butt stuff and all that other stuff. I'm not sure if that was specifically in this review, but it was more that tone than it was an actual review about the film. I can't imagine seeing this movie without knowing other things, but of the last 11 years. But even if you don't, it's still smartly done. And when you see Professor Hulk in old Hulk land, that's hard to say, you know that there's a difference in the character just by that reaction to what he does, because you see Smashing Hulk and then you see Professor Hulk, and you know that this is what he used to be and this is what he is now. So I think that's well written, because for somebody who doesn't know anything about the first Avengers film, now knows that that's how he was and this is how he is, and it doesn't fit anymore. So it's well done. Whether or not you love these kind of movies, you can't fault that.
Yeah, I think that this particular run of movies is something that has never, this narrative and the amount of time and energy and money, the energy that's been taken and the money that has been spent on this run of films has never happened before, and it may never happen again. We don't know what the next phase is going to be like, or especially now that the problem now is that they've got Disney Plus, which is the new streaming service. So there's all of these other like either offshoots or parallel things that are all set up where they're not going to have as much money. They're not going to have as much. They're going to have to create more content for less money. And that's what TV shows were. They were more content than movies and less money than movies. But what they essentially did over the last 22 films of the MCU was they spent the most money on the most amount of screen time. And I don't think that's ever going to happen again. I mean, it may, but it's not going to be in the same way. It's not going to be a solidified, vision, and it's going to serve more than just this one master, because they're going to need to make sure that they make shows on Disney Plus that make money, that get people to subscribe every month, and that's their number one goal. Whereas with these movies, their number one goal was to get butts in the seats opening weekend, get people to come a second time, sell the DVDs and Blu-rays, and then sell the streaming rights to Netflix. Well, now that's all out the window. So that idea will be interesting to see how they move forward with this. They of course will still make movies, and these movies will still be successful, but I think it's going to be a more the focus is going to be a lot more split than how it has been. And really, I've listened to interviews with Kevin Feige, Marvel Studios is like 6 people. It's like a small group of people, and they are the ones who've been responsible for shepherding this MCU through to this point. And now they have a lot more flexibility now in some ways, because they just got 21st Century Fox IP, so they can start peppering in X-Men and use the words mutant and all of that stuff now, whereas they weren't able to before that. So that's going to be interesting to see what they do with that. But I don't know if it's going to be the same as this, run of movies has been. But that's okay. We'll see where it goes.
I think the only requirement that they will have for themselves, or should have for themselves, says Paul James in Norfolk, Virginia, is another Star Trek reference. Star Trek works for me because it's consistent. And throughout all of the shows and throughout all of the franchises and all of the movies, they've all been connected, and they've never changed anybody's timeline unless it was something like the new reboot, if you will, where they altered timelines, and then things went from that point on. But they didn't change something in a, a, a future movie that would have affected somebody in the past because it was just convenient for that movie. They stayed consistent with that. So as long as Marvel stays consistent with what they've already set up, they've done what they set out to do for 22 movies. Whether or not it can be as big as it was, meaning 22 movies that end in an end game, I don't think is their goal. And if it is their goal, I don't know how they're going to accomplish that. But I think they just need to stay consistent. They need to stay consistent with what they set up. If they're going to do this Falcon show, is it going to begin with what ended at Endgame? Or is it going to go back after he's already Captain America, which is consistent with what is the precedence in the comic book, or at least at one point? Was the thing at the end credits, did you stay all the way through the end of the movie?
I did.
Right. Is that the new female Iron Man putting together her costume? Is that what is that? That metal on metal sound? What was that? It sort of sounded like what Tony Stark was doing in the cave in the first movie. So
I think that's what it was.
it's yeah. Oh, that's what you think it is?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes sense. But as long as they stay consistent with what they've set up, they can't change something in the future of their TV shows or their movies that would alter something in the past. And obviously, they can put a movie together like this with all these timelines and all these going back in time and all this stuff and stay consistent with what they did and not alter it at all. So I don't think they're going to have any problem. I just don't. I think they're
Yeah.
smart, and I think they're going to. It would be nice that the next 10 years of movies don't necessarily connect with the TV shows or vice versa, or unless it has something to do with the timeline of a character.
Hmm.
I think individual movies are fine. If the next Black Panther doesn't connect to the next Captain Marvel, doesn't connect to, you
Doctor
know,
Strange.
yeah, it's fine with me. They've done what they set out to do. And I think what they did was difficult and they proved that they can do it. Now let's see something different. And I think the only different thing they can do is to not bother doing that anymore. So it's amazing what they did.
Well, so okay, let's go back to now that the characters are in their own respective pasts. The one in New York, was Captain America fighting Captain America? Was that kind of based on any kind of a comic book thing, or was that just kind of like a fan service type thing? Because I thought it was amazing. I thought it was so good, so much fun, and it worked as a fight scene. But I didn't know if it had any kind of a basis in comic book lore.
It's the one thing that I don't know. I know that he at one point is an agent of Hydra. So when he goes Hail Hydra,
I
that
heard
covers
that.
that.
Yeah.
The whole Falcon at the end, that covers that. There are a lot of things that I am an outlier of Marvel comics. I've talked about the movies and the animated shows and some of the comic books, but I was not an avid reader of Marvel comics growing up. I was a DC fan, so I don't know that much. I don't know if that is something that is fan service, but it doesn't matter to me because it was brilliant. It was
Yep.
smart what they did when he said Loki is loose. Oh, that makes perfect sense. He doesn't have to think about it. He doesn't have to explain himself. He doesn't have to do anything. And
Yep.
then to have them fight and it not be this big epic thing, although it was a great fight, but it's over and done. Oh, and then the elevator scene right before it, that's brilliant in the Hail Hydra because that reminds you of what happens in Winter Soldier, which was
Exactly, and it
great.
subverts that because you expected another amazing fight. You did get an amazing fight, just not that amazing fight.
Right. And, you know, I don't know how comfortable you are talking about Captain America looking at Captain America's butt, but to be honest with you, I've read a lot of articles about this and, there's been these pros and cons to that in the fact that, is that like subjectifying somebody or objectifying somebody? And if it was a female, would we be able to do that? And my answer
Yeah.
to that is yes, if the butt was a prominent joke throughout the movie and that it was
Hmm.
it was made into a joke. And I'm sorry, you might not have noticed it, but I've noticed it over the years. There are prominent shots of Chris Evans' rear end throughout these films, and it is America's buttocks, and it's a damn good butt. So anyway, I got that out without being too
He
weird.
should be proud of it. But I do think that has there haven't been any comments about his butt, I guess, throughout the movies, other than Tony Stark saying it right in there. And
But that's what makes it so great because unlike you, some of us have noticed how prominent his gluteus maximus is. There's a shot in the first Avengers film when he's boxing and he's knocking down the big sandbag or whatever they call them, and he picks it up. I mean, there's a prominent shot where you're like, damn, like his body looks like steel.
they have shots of women like that too. I mean, I think it was
Totally.
the end of Avengers: Age of Ultron with Black Widow. I mean, it's there is a shot of. I mean, it's not of just her butt, but it is mostly her, but also focused on. She's in a position where it looks very nice, but that I don't think that that's anything that they're objectifying to the point where I mean, these are like skin tight suits. They're superheroes. They're built well. They're gonna you're it's inevitable.
And here's what justifies it for me. This is how they're exaggerated and they look in the comic books. Women
Yeah.
are exaggerated and men are exaggerated. And it's ridiculous on some kind of level, but it's also the ideal. It's not like
Yeah.
the everyday human being can look like that. Well, most people can if they tried hard enough. But the point is that to actually, it's been throughout these movies, Captain America and his behind. And then to actually call it out,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's kind of like weird, but cool. But what's
It's
happening here?
meta.
Is this, yeah, it is meta. And then is Tony Stark, okay, that's appropriate because that's what he would do. But why are we, is happening here? And then to put the cherry on the sundae by saying that is America's butt, by commenting on your own behind is brilliant, in my opinion.
Well, so we'll stick with these guys because I kind of knew something was going to happen, something was going to go wrong, but I didn't know how wrong it was going to go, and I thought that that was great how they inevitably they think they have all the stones in New York, or at least the two stones that Cap and Iron Man are responsible for, and then Loki ends up like disappearing with the Tesseract, so they have to go back. So they have to go back to 1970, which I thought was kind of cool. And you know what? Michael Douglas looks amazing. The whole like face replacement thing for him looks great. The de-aging looks really good. That's a long way to go back, and it still looks good. I think they did a little bit on John Slattery too. Not too much, but I think it was mostly makeup, and then they enhanced it. They enhanced it and kind of sweetened up some of the colors, I think, on his face. But both of those scenes were great. I mean the Peggy Carter scene, looking into to her,
Mm.
and then also him being able to see his dad and kind of talk to his dad. It really sounded like when he said, like, do you want to walk out or whatever he said. It sounded like he was saying. It reminded me of Field of Dreams when he's
Oh,
like, you want to have a catch.
oh,
Like
don't even
that's
get me
what it
started.
reminded me of.
Don't even get me
So
started. Oh my
yeah, I
God.
thought it
I
was
can't even
so
think
cool.
about it. Well, here's why it's cool. It's so cool on so many levels because once again, they found a way for Loki to steal the Tesseract, which he's
Yeah.
been doing from day one. He just
Yep.
disappears with it. It just pops away with it. It's like, and when they did that, I was like, okay, that makes sense. And they put more things at stake. And that's exactly what would happen. And it just pays homage and all of these remember when moments come back, and that's great. And then when you realize where they have to go back to, that's one of those moments I whisper to myself, he's going to have his moment with his dad. He's going to
Yeah.
see his dad. And I think it's something the fans wanted. I don't know if there's a precedence in the comic book for it because I don't think Endgame ends the way that the comic book ends. Somebody was filling me in on what actually
You mean
happened
the
in the comic
Infinity
book.
Gauntlet
Yeah,
comic
Infinity
book?
Gauntlet.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I know some stuff, but I don't know enough about it. I don't know if there's ever been a time when Tony Stark has gone back in time and seen his dad. The point is that if it didn't happen, would we have noticed it? I'm not so sure. But now that it happened, if it didn't happen, we would be like, why did that not happen? It makes perfect sense. And the fact that, he can't reveal who he is, obviously, and he can't. And the moment when you realize that she's still pregnant with him, and
Mm,
Robert Downey Jr. kind of has a moment where he realizes he didn't really connect those dots at first, even though I guess he should have. But,
mm-hmm.
he's kind of like, wait, what's happening? And then he realizes he hasn't even been born yet. And he's still talking to his dad in the past. It's a touching, emotional moment. And you're right. That Field of Dreams moment it's in my top 10 movies of all time. And it's
Mm.
because of that. And I dream of going to that field. Ha ha ha. See what I did there? Um, to see that field in real life would just drive me crazy because once again, we're back to the 90% father and sons. And, it's nice because I took my dad and I think my dad was a little bit confused.
Yeah.
He's not really following it as well, but it's an epic over the top movie. And I'm not sure, even if he had seen Infinity War again and then watched this, it would have gelled for him like it does for us. It's just not his thing. But what my father does have the ability to do is react to emotional situations regardless of understanding what happened before or after, and he reacted to that. And to actually be able to sit next to your dad when that happens, it's like, how can you not love life at that moment? And you're like, oh my God, don't start crying now in the middle of this movie. Like, I know something's happened at the end that I'm not going to be able to handle not crying, but
Yeah.
that I will cry. So, okay, don't do it yet, dude. Like, come on, chill. It's cool. Your dad, love you, dad. Love you, Tony. Love you, dad. Get on, move on, go, 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 go. So,
Uh,
yeah, it's a really good moment. It really is
yeah.
satisfying as an audience member of 22 films and 11 years. Satisfying. Absolutely
Yeah.
satisfying.
Mm. I wanted to move to Morag, and we get to see we get to see Star Lord dancing to his Walkman, and you don't really realize how funny it would be to see someone just like rocking out to their Walkman from a third party point of view until they showed it to us, because it does. And I think they used a lot of shots from the beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy. Like there's like a shot where he slides across some like goo or something, and he's like throwing the little rat things, and you're just immediately when I saw that I was like, man, Guardians of the Galaxy is a great movie. It's so much fun. And then we get to see, number one, how goofy he looks, and then number two, how easily he's bested when he's, because really when you think about it, it's a horrible strategic move to put on headphones and crank music when you're in a place where other people could be going to get thing that that you're trying to smuggle. It's just bad strategic planning, and it bit him in the butt.
But it's great movie making because
Yeah,
what about all those people who thought of that before this ever
you're
came out?
right.
Oh,
Yeah,
Peter Quill's an idiot. He would have been hit on the head because he's got his headsets on. That's cheesy. Everybody's got to hate on something. He
yep,
couldn't hear. He's not that smart. Blah, watch out for Ronan the Accuser, who I call the Destroyer, but he's the Accuser. Anyway, and then they kind of they tongue in cheek themselves,
yeah,
and that's a great way of saying we're never going to satisfy
yeah,
everybody, but we understand that's a legitimate gripe. But I
yeah.
would have never thought of that gripe until we saw that.
So yeah, so he's an idiot.
I love that because he just gets taken out like that,
He's done.
just done.
So then Black Widow and Hawkeye go to Vormir to get the Soul Stone. Did they not realize? It seems like Nebula knew what happened at Vormir when Thanos went with Gamora, but I guess she didn't like tip them off to that. Nebula didn't tip them off to like, hey, one of you's gonna have to die. I don't know. It just seemed weird.
I've been thinking about that, and yeah, there's a void in there, and I couldn't figure out why there's a void for me. But that's exactly it. Because you're right. Because she would know that.
Yeah. She tells Gamora about it later on. She's like, do you know what happened to Vormir? Do you know why Thanos got the Soul Stone at Vormir? But anyway, it does put them. We know, and they wait to that. That's like the last one, I think, of all the. We kind of do the round robin, and that's the last one you really focus on because you know that it's gonna be real tense. And I don't know. I mean, so Black Widow doesn't really have a family. She was like orphaned. She doesn't. Her whole family is the Avengers. She has some sort of a romantic entanglement with Hulk, but her relationship with Hawkeye is deep to the point where she loves him and he loves her. They love each other in a way that is, I guess not romantic maybe, but is enough to satisfy the Soul Stone prerequisites. So I thought that was interesting that they're really kind of like putting that out there, saying that like this is just as deep as a relationship as a father and daughter relationship would be. The father and daughter relationship from the previous movie, where Thanos throws Gamora off.
I never thought about it like you just said, that it's not a romantic love and it's not a father and daughter love. It's interesting to me that we as moviegoers don't really think of friendship love as deep as we do as father daughter, family member love, that kind of stuff. But yet we spend decades upon decades of watching films about people who are in love with each other who are just friends, regardless. Because I had this discussion with somebody when I was in college. They were saying that romantic love can be the only love that you're in love with somebody with. You can only be in love with somebody that you're romantically involved. And I was like, love is love. You're in love with that person, regardless of whether or not it's a romantic love. in love is an expression for having love for somebody, not being in it just because you're romantically. And I'm
Involved.
sticking to that
Yeah.
because now the Russo brothers prove me right again. Because you're exactly right that it's interesting to me that these comic book movies have such a depth to them that they don't necessarily need per se, because we could have just a bunch of battles and it would be just as cool. But the fact that they wrote these characters with such enriched, encircled lives, that somebody sacrificing themselves for another person, regardless of male, female, like if it was Captain America and Tony Stark, it still would have worked because they have a love for each other. They're
Hmm.
in love with each other. But when you say that, people get a little freaked out. Like, wait,
Yeah.
no, they're not in love with each other. Well, technically, yes, they are. Anyway, but yeah, that's an interesting point because we didn't question it when it was Gamora and Thanos. We just questioned the fact that he was sick enough to love somebody and to sacrifice and kill somebody for the benefit of what he thought was a true path, which we need to discuss at some point, maybe not in this podcast, maybe later on, that I kind of think Thanos has a little bit of a. I'm a little okay with what Thanos is.
Yeah, we need to discuss that later because I've sensed
Yeah.
a trend in your some of the discussions we've had in the past with like overpopulation and all that. So yeah.
Yeah, I have an understanding of why somebody would have that thought. I'm not saying I would have that thought.
Well, but even if you did have that thought, would you have the right to impose your thought on everyone else in that's ever been in existence?
If I was the type of person who would misinterpret what I just said, then yes.
Oh, I see what
But
you're saying.
no, I
Yeah.
the reason why I am not okay with what Thanos does is because of the imposing your one belief on everybody's belief.
There you go.
Although your one belief might be true, but we've broken this down with conversations with friends and coworkers and stuff like that. And we've talked all the way about, all the way down to making plastic bags outlawed. And somebody's like, well, you can't do that. You can't tell me I can't use a plastic bag. I was like, yes, we can if you're struggling to survive as a society because your environment sucks because you can't put that plastic bag where it belongs. Click it and tick it, bitch. Like they made that a law because you guys are stupid enough not to put your seatbelts on.
Well,
And you're
yeah,
flying through your windshields and killing kids. So put your damn seatbelt on.
I agree, but I think there's a difference between regulations and the things that you're talking about. So, all right, let's.
And I'm exaggerating.
All right, so we didn't talk about the Hulk and the Ancient One, but I mean it's basically exposition city, so I don't think we need to really go through that.
Good to see Tilda Swinton, though.
It's great to see Tilda Swinton. No, it's great, and
I wasn't expecting it.
I wasn't either, but really, when you think about it, it's like, what were they expecting? Doctor Strange wasn't Doctor Strange. I mean, he was Doctor Strange, but he wasn't the ethereal Doctor Strange that in 2012 or whatever. So it makes total sense that they're not going to be able to roll in there and get the time stone from Doctor Strange. It's got to be somebody else. So that was good. I mean, it made logical sense once you lay that out. They get everything together. They do the snap, and people start coming back. But really, once they do the snap, that's the third act. That's the big battle. And the fact that Hulk has to do it, I guess it makes sense. It's very convenient that it's all gamma radiation. I guess. First of all, how do they know it's gamma radiation? Maybe just the radiation emanating from the stones when they're just sitting there is gamma. I don't know, but I don't know. It just seems like you said, he's like, I'm kind of built for this, and it's like, okay, I guess so. But I it was cool the way they were able to get everybody separated, and the fact that nobody died was amazing, obviously, but that's just the 1 in 14 million and 605 or whatever, uh, you know, version that this reality was. But being able to get Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor all together on top of all the rubble with Thanos being right out there was I think a good way to give them their time, because they're the ones who've had enough as much more time in this universe than any of the other characters, and so you give them their time with Thanos while everybody else is kind of struggling to get back up, and we get this kind of like mini battle, which I thought was great. It all is kind of building up to Thanos is beating them all up until we get to see Captain America pick up the hammer for real this time. So I've heard a bunch of different things. I've heard that at one point, like in Avengers Age of Ultron, he could have moved this is like whatever the I don't know if the Russo said this or not. Like he could have moved the hammer, but he decided not to because he didn't want to hurt Thor's feelings. But really, that reveal I think was one of those kind of like just yeah, everybody in the theater cheered. Like, and I was listening the second time watching the movie. I was paying more attention to the other people in the theater and their reactions to the movie because I knew what was coming up. Because initially, the first time I was reacting just as wildly as they were, but it was really neat to be able to hear those reactions, those genuine reactions in the theater. I thought that was just so cool, and I got to enjoy that a lot more the second time. But what do you think about Captain America wielding Mjolnir?
Oh, very good. That's good. I'm not even going to attempt it. When I look at it, when I read it, I'm like, and I just keep going. I forget it. The word is spelled so strangely, and you know me, it's hard enough for me. But anyway, I think that the Captain America, Thor, and Iron Man fighting Thanos in that open space harkens back to the first Avengers fight that they have in the forest. It reminded me of that.
Mm.
And I thought, well, that's a great way to remind us of that, that these people have come this far and look how much distance it is. They were fighting each other. Now they're fighting this guy. Because you don't see him pick up the hammer. All of a sudden he has it and he's standing there in such a comic book pose. And it's just like epic. And then Thor goes, I knew it. It doesn't, for me personally, if you're going to have to justify how he can do it now versus why he couldn't do it before, that's not the fun of it. The fun of it is the fact that he can and he did at that moment.
Mm.
Because I, I don't know if I buy into he just didn't to hurt Thor's feelings. Maybe he didn't believe he was worthy at the time,
Yeah.
but now he does believe after everything that he's been through. It matters not because it's a cool as hell shot. And to actually see Thor's reaction is just and to not have Thor disappointed, but to have him like elated over it, and that fact that of course this is the one person who could
Mm-hmm.
do this. Of course it's him. So, and the fact that both of them exist, his two hammers, what's the other one called?
Stormbreaker.
Stormbreaker. I was going to say Storm Chaser for some reason. To have them both and to be utilized in different ways is great because we can't just throw away Stormbreaker because we don't need it anymore because we've got the hammer back, and I'm going to avoid trying to pronounce it. But we can utilize both. And the way that they do is brilliant because it answers that question. And I'm sure somebody out there, if they didn't do that, would get to the end of Endgame and go, but it's not been answered. How come nobody can Captain America pick up his hammer? Why didn't they answer that question? Somebody out there would be
Mm.
bothered by it. So they covered it, and it's really well done. And once again, I think that fight there between those three and Thanos is just a perfect snapshot of what the rest of the movie has been. They minimized and brought us back to what we saw in the original Avengers film and just took the time to have them three fight.
Yeah.
Because once that whole epic thing happens, it's really hard to focus on what's what. And you focus on what you can because, and they do a good job at putting Spider-Man in the frame and putting Gwyneth Paltrow in the frame. They do a really good job at what you're supposed to be noticing. You notice. I can't wait to see it again and again so I can look at that over and over again. But I don't know when it happens, but when does the shot happen where it's just Captain America standing against Thanos? Do you know the shot I'm talking about? It's just Captain America. Is it before that or right after that?
I think that it's before that. It's because it's before all the portals open up and before he hears. It's because his shield gets chopped in half essentially.
Right.
Gets kind of like
And he
chopped
stands up.
apart, and then he stands up, and then at the moment that he tightens the belt on his shield's like a half shield at that point. That's when he's he's all bloody. He's got like blood in his teeth and all that stuff, and blood in his mouth, I guess. And then he gets ready to kind of go in one more time, and then that's when he hears like on your left, which I guess was something that Captain America said to Falcon.
No, when he's running, when he's passing him, when he's running him by the monument in DC. Yeah, see, that's
Yeah.
great. How could, come on, that's just great. But there's that one wide shot of just Captain America against Thanos and the rest of Thanos'
I remember
army.
that. Yeah, and they're like both real small. Yeah, Captain America's on the left and Thanos is on the right, and the sun's going down for like 45 minutes. It doesn't matter. It looks amazing.
It's one of the best shots in movie history. I don't care how many people want to joke me about that or how many people want to, it is just the greatest shot because it shows you exactly what human nature
Yeah,
is, that we will stand regardless of the fact that we're going to be defeated. There's no way he can do all of this, obviously, but he's going to stand anyway because he is the best of who we are. He is the Captain America. And it's not Captain America, it's Captain of everywhere
sure.
at that point. And he is going to stand regardless. And they actually make a comment about that somewhere in the film. We did make our stand, blah, blah, blah. Look how that worked, and yada, yada. But then they show it just that one man by himself. And it's just, that shot is so great. It's been going around Twitter,
Mm.
the Twitterverse, the film Twitter world, and it's just really great because when you make that shot bigger on your phone or on your computer and you look at how well that's designed, it's him by himself against all of that, and then you hear on your left, which
Yeah.
is just I just was giddy. I was like, of course. That's of course how you break into the fact that they have returned. That's of course how you would do it. It's so
It's so great.
smart. And maybe it's just like, like obvious to everybody. That's the way it should have been, but it wasn't obvious to me until it happened. And I went, yes, of
Well,
course.
and then also we get everybody coming in. We get Black Panther, we get Shuri and Okoye, and everyone's coming in, and we get to see them all in that kind of like it's a replica of the side shot. Everybody's looking to the right, and everybody's all lined up, and everybody's all in the frame, and then it does kind of that swooping, dolly in, or probably like a crane in, and it ends up on his face, and he says, I guess for the first time in any of these movies, he says Avengers Assemble, because he gets cut off in Age of Ultron, I think. But this is the first
Yes.
time that he's actually said Avengers Assemble in any of these movies. And the way that he says it, and just like the music, it's written by Alan Silvestri, who also wrote the music for Back to the Future. I will ride and die for Back to the Future. So it's uh, it's just amazing the way that it all came together. And then we start getting the hot potato game where everybody gets their own. Well, not everybody, but multiple people get their own kind of like chance with the Infinity Gauntlet, or with the stones, Infinity Stones, and it's a battle. I mean, I don't really have anything good or I mean, I don't know. It's a battle. We've seen these before. We saw it in Infinity War. I think that once Captain Marvel gets introduced, she kind of swoops in right at the last minute, of course, like she always does. And it's one of those things where it's like maybe she could have come, like, I don't know, 15 minutes earlier and like just made things a lot easier, but whatever. She shows up and kills, busts up his ship, because we know she can do that because of the previous Captain Marvel movie, and everything's looking on the up and up. One issue I have with this fight is you alluded to it earlier, the group of women that all get together, and how, Spider-Man's got it and he gives it to Captain Marvel, and he's like, I don't know how you're going to get through all those things. And then it's like, she won't have a problem. She's got us. And I feel like it was more of like an on the nose, overt type of a thing, where it's like, logistically, I don't see how they all could, all of the women of this movie, all of the women of this movie would be in that particular place at that particular moment logistically. And I don't have a problem with that happening, but the fact that they're like, we're all women and we're all going to help this woman do this thing for the sake of humanity right now, it seemed a little out of place. I don't have a problem with it. I have a problem with them saying like, "Look, guys, look at all the women in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and look how much butt they can kick."
Absolutely. There has been a lot of discussion on the internet about that, and I get both sides. They say it's pandering, that they're pandering to the fact that now they're all like feminist and all look at all the women we have in our movies, when they spent 11 movies and didn't have a lead female once until Captain Marvel. And a lot of
That's
people have
20
said, why didn't
movies.
Captain Marvel just put,
You said 11 movies.
oh yeah, I said
11
11.
years, I
Right.
guess. Yeah.
11 years, 22 movies. Right. And a lot of people said, well, why didn't Captain Marvel just put the glove on? Because she's the most powerful character in this movie. So why wouldn't she put it on and snap? My response to that was maybe she didn't know what the plan was, because she was obviously out of touch on some kind of level, because she comes in at the last minute, Deus Ex Machina. But the bottom line for me is it doesn't matter, because it's Tony's moment. And I don't care if you want to argue that or not, who's the most powerful character. It should have been Tony. It had to be Tony. And because he started this, he ends this. I'm fine with that.
The reason why she doesn't put it on to snap is because she's trying to get it to the time machine. She's trying to get it to the van so that they can take it back in time to put all the stones back. That's the thing they're trying to do.
Right. But isn't part of that plan to have it snap so they can snap everybody on Thanos' side out of place? Out of,
Well, I don't think that well,
because isn't that what Tony
Hulk
does?
almost died, and nobody thought that anybody would be able to handle the power of that, just even having the glove on. But Tony was able to barely have the glove on and snap,
Well,
and then he died. But yeah,
and he pays the consequence for that. And I think it's a great dramatic moment. As for the logistics of all the women being together, see, it didn't bother me on any level, because one, I thought it was cool to see them all together, and two, it harkens back to that moment in Infinity War when she's not alone, when they're fighting Carrie Coons, which I wish they had brought Carrie Coons back in to do one or two lines in
yeah,
that scene where they like, remember us, bitch? I don't know what you're talking about, and Carrie Coons' really cool voice, because you don't really you see them, those characters, Thanos's henchmen or whatever they're called. There's a name for it. I don't know what their name is. For me, it was just one more moment that reminded us of another moment in these 22 movies in these 11 years that we've just spent. So, do I understand that it's pandering? Absolutely. I can see how somebody sees that. Do I understand that it logically doesn't make any sense to you? I totally see that. But the moment it happens, I will admit, I loved it, but it did feel weird to me. And then it had to be explained to me why I felt a little weird about it, because it's logistically doesn't make sense, and why, and she's Captain Marvel, why would she need all of them? Blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's been 1,000 different reasons why it just doesn't make any sense. But I don't think, honestly, when I thought about after I read all of this stuff, and man, there's a rabbit hole of stuff on Twitter. You got to be careful, because you just go from one to the next to the next to the next to the next, and most of them are not as optimistic as I like for my world to be. So it's kind of strange after you get off of it. You kind of withdraw a little bit, and then you try to figure out where you fall in the opinions of other people. And for me, I understand pandering, I understand the logistics discussion, but for me, it was, and I understand that people thought they just did it because they were trying to show how cool they are on all these female characters. But for me, it felt like the Russo brothers did it because one, they could, and two, it's a reminder of what these group of women have done over these movies. Even though they haven't been the most prominent characters in the movie, it was just like, and also maybe a possibility of what is to come, what is to
mm-hmm.
come. And then I started thinking about all the moments where the women are prominent parts of these movies. I mean, it is Black Widow who is in charge of all of
Mm-hmm.
this, and it is Captain Marvel who is in charge of interstellar space. And really, Rocket doesn't count because he's a raccoon, although I guess he's a boy raccoon. And then Rhodey doesn't count because he's really more machine than man at this point. So the point is that women have had maybe not as prominent of parts as the men. And obviously that's true, because here's another thing that somebody said that I thought was a really good point. I didn't think about it, but it was a really good point. They said, think about it this way. You see shot after shot after shot after shot of Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, Spider-Man all talking together, and nobody goes, look at that group of people. Look at them all together. Then you put the women together and people go, look at all of those women together.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if there were more women together and more women in prominent roles in these movies, then it wouldn't be that big of a deal to have all the women together. Totally get it. But for me, I don't know. I was just like, look at, they're cool. I want to hang out with all of them. I just want to hang with them. I get it, but I think if it wasn't there, it might have been a thought later on for me. She's not alone. Why didn't they call back to that? I would have thought about that because I watched Infinity War before I saw this again. Strangely enough, not because I was seeing Endgame, just because it was on and I wanted to watch it. And then halfway through it, I was like, wait, I kind of should be watching this because I'm getting ready to see the end part to this. But I didn't originally watch it. And that is one of my favorite moments in that movie. So for me, it was a celebration of that moment.
Well, we haven't talked about Gamora at all, about how Gamora is back in some capacity, but it's, pre Guardians Gamora that we get. So at the end of the movie, they're kind of searching for her. So I'm assuming she'll be back. But I thought that was an interesting wrinkle or way to get around, a way to retcon the Gamora character and keep her around in a different faculty. She's going to serve a different role, I think, in the next Guardians of the Galaxy movie, but I think she'll still be involved. I'm sure she will still be involved.
But I have a question about that. So when Iron Man snaps his finger and Thanos and his army start to disappear like they did in Infinity War, does that mean that Gamora and Nebula from that time frame disappears too?
Nebula from that time frame is dead because Nebula from this time frame killed her, and
Right.
Gamora from that time frame. I believe that it's a little bit more granular, where Tony is able to say, because it's really like a genie in a bottle. I think the Infinity Stones are a genie in a bottle. You get one wish, and Thanos was in his benevolence said, just randomly pick 50% of the people and kill them. Whereas Tony Stark is like, you're good and you're good and you're bad and you're bad and all the bad people die. I think that's what's happening there.
Okay.
He might have been
Okay.
like, all the bad people except for Gamora die, except for, make sure Gamora doesn't die. I'm gonna snap my fingers. I think that's kind of where it landed. But there's definitely, Gamora is still, it says searching for Gamora. I'm assuming she's around, but we don't see her at the end. We don't see her post snap. But post snap, maybe we do. I don't know. I don't remember seeing her post snap. Either way, I'm sure she's still around. So we get to see Tony have a good death sequence, or a good death scene, I guess. And they stretched it out. I was kind of amazed at how long they spent. And I noticed how they staged it too, where they had like War Machine, then Spider Man, then his wife, then Pepper. So that was, I mean, you could kind of expect that to happen. But what about but we didn't even talk about his line. The I am inevitable versus I am Iron Man. I think this movie really leans into the fact that Iron Man was the first movie of this cinematic universe, and it was something that they didn't know was going to be successful, and they were just trying to make a movie out of a character that nobody has heard of except for Marvel comic fans. And it was successful. And because of the success of that first movie, this is what we get. This is what we've been able to have. And they're really playing that up. And the fact that the last line of that movie was I am Iron Man, and the last line that Iron Man says is I am Iron Man, that's just awesome. It's such a great bookend.
It's perfect. I will say I love, it sounds strange to say I love the funeral scene, but I did love it. Did you notice that one young, I'd say he's probably, do you know
I
who
didn't
he is?
notice him, but I've heard about him. The kid from Iron Man 3. That's
Yeah.
him. But
Yeah.
it's a little
I
weird.
noticed him and I was like, well, it just seems to be a little bit out of place because there are a lot of little characters that you could have done that for.
They're setting up like young Avengers or something, and he's gonna be like young Iron Man, Iron Boy. I don't know what you call him.
Yeah, I would have definitely, if you were going to add him in, I would have made it, I don't know. I think it's kind of smart and kind of weird at the same time because for people who did know exactly, I wasn't sure who he was, and he's not one of the last people that you see somewhere in the middle. So you're trying to figure out his prominence. So it sort of,
He's pretty far back.
yeah, he's pretty far back, but he's not the last. Anyway, so the only thing that I thought of when I was during the funeral scene, I did kind of come out of it because I thought to myself, well, they didn't have anything for Black Widow. They didn't even really. I mean, you have that one scene where you find out when
She's
when
not coming
when
back.
Hawkeye comes back and he kind of kneels down. Yeah, she's not coming back. I I would have felt better. She's a prominent character in that universe, and she sacrificed herself for everybody. and it's a shock because you're not expecting it to be her. You're hearing people are dying in this movie. It seemed right but wrong all at the same time, meaning right for the storyline but wrong because she's great. And you're not expecting it. You're expecting Tony. You're expecting Captain America. You're expecting something. You're not sure what's going on with Hawkeye when he's Ronin. You're not sure what's happening before this movie happens. So when it's her, it was kind of a surprise because you're not expecting it to be her. But she was a prominent character in this world. And I would have felt better if somebody had lit a candle for in front of her picture, or somebody had walked by as they were stopping in front of her picture to put a black shroud over top of it. We don't have time for that. Unfortunately, we're at a point where, we've got to move on with our
Mm-hmm.
plan. We'll take time to remember her later. Something.
Yeah.
And then maybe a picture on the porch with some flowers around it to represent the fact that she's not the only fallen hero. And unfortunately, with this pandering issue and these issues about not representing females as well as they could in 22 movies, 11 years, as we mentioned a lot. That's what the name of this podcast should be, by the way. Um, is that you're taking as prominent a character as Iron Man and you're not giving it her due. And it would have felt better for me if there had been something. And and I felt it immediately. I thought to myself, they're not even mentioning it. On the other hand, she was a very private character who had a private past, who kept it all secret. She was one person who became another person, and this was her life. So maybe she wouldn't have liked that anyway. But something to pay homage to the fact that she was as prominent as Tony
Yeah.
Stark because she's been in it almost as long as he has.
Iron
She's
Man
in
2 is when
Iron
she
Man
came in.
2.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's amazing
Her
in that.
entry into that, like, because she walks into the ring and just like takes him down. That's so cool.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then that first kind of sequence where you see her actually do her stuff
Yeah.
is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So it just would have felt better. And I understand, once again, we're back to that point I made at the beginning where maybe if they took a little less time in the beginning, although I understand why they did it and I liked it, then at the end they could have maybe attached something there. It's not
Mm. Yeah.
it's not affecting me as a moviegoer, but it would have felt better.
Yeah.
Even if Clint had said, Natasha would have hated
Yeah.
this. I'm glad we didn't do this. Something.
Yeah.
Because she saved them. Would like a couple of them wouldn't be alive because of her.
Half of them.
Yeah, I know, right? Exactly.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, that's true.
well, yeah, that's the big picture. But if you go throughout this universe, she's done a couple
Oh
of
yeah.
things that have tweaked the way things have moved, and things would have gone drastically different. And she sides with Tony instead of Cap in Civil War. So, I mean, it's just one of those things. It by no means stopped me from bawling like a baby because I was done.
Mm.
I mean, from the moment they start opening those portals and they start walking through, done. That fight between, and then the thing with the fight, just to go back that for a split second, is that everybody who you wanted to see challenge Thanos got to challenge Thanos and to see how they would be affected without him in the
Captain
gauntlet.
Marvel,
And
even.
yeah,
Because that's the same shot as in Infinity War. Because in Infinity War, you've got Captain America trying to kind of like push against the gauntlet, and he can't, and then he gets headbutted, and then Thanos tries that with Captain Marvel, and nothing doing. So that was
no,
really cool.
not happening. So that was great to see Scarlet Witch fight him and actually be
Yeah.
successful, but not completely successful. That was a great fight. She's amazing. So I was satisfied at the end of the movie. I didn't want to sidetrack my satisfaction for the movie by mentioning that thing about Black Widow, but I think it needed to be mentioned
Mm.
for me on some level.
Yeah.
But that said, it's epic and the ending is ugh.
Yeah. Well, we also get to see Thor hand over his kingdom of Little Asgard. What is it called? Is it called Little Asgard?
New Asgard. I think it's
New
New
Asgard,
Asgard,
yeah.
isn't it?
New Asgard
Yeah.
to Valkyrie. So that was kind of cool. And then he's now a guardian, I guess, an Asgardian. So he's a guardian of the galaxy. I think that's got to be where they're going with it. So that's kind of cool. That I'm kind of amazed if he's actually, or maybe he'll just be at the beginning of the movie or something and move on. I don't know, but that'd be kind of interesting if Chris Hemsworth stays as Thor as just one piece of Guardians of the Galaxy.
I think it would be interesting, but we don't need it.
Well,
I
no,
feel
we don't need it, but
satisfied.
yeah,
I feel like if it all ended today, we're good. Like there's not another Marvel film out there. I know a lot of people would be like, "What? Do we need another Guardians of the Galaxy?" Sure, we need these movies, but if they didn't happen for whatever reason, this feels complete, and that's hard to do.
yeah,
It's hard to end something that has meant so much to people, and they did it perfectly.
yeah.
They really did.
So, what do you think about the last scene with Captain America not coming back from returning all the stones?
I'm a little bit confused about that on some kind of like technical level. Like, how did that happen? And did he mess with the timeline? Because if he goes back and he hangs out with Peggy Carter for that whole entire time, then doesn't he mess with the timeline, or is that
No, he. It's a separate timeline. It's kind of like on the rooftop of Doctor Strange's place where they're talking
okay?
about he's able to live out that black timeline that kind of like spurs off to the side. He's able to live out that black timeline, and then when he gets to the end, when he gets to where he wants to move back, then he's able to return the stone to that point, and then he can use the Pym particles to jump back to the moment that he meets them.
Falcon becomes Captain America, and Captain America gets to be loved by his love. I'm good with it because that scene of him carrying the coffin in I think it's Age of Ultron, isn't it? Where Peggy dies.
Wasn't that in
Uh
Civil War?
is it
I
Civil
think I
War?
think it's later on. Maybe it was Age of Ultron. I don't know.
Yeah. 15 years from now, after I've seen these movies over and over again, I will know that fact right off the bat, but I'm not sure. But anyway, that's a devastating scene, and he's crushed. And then once again, who comes in and saves him? Black Widow. Well, why are you here? Because I didn't want you to be alone. It's so crushingly beautiful. So the fact, and now I'm going to start getting, oh, I'm going to be good. The fact that he gets to be in love with his love, how can you not love
Mm-hmm.
that? I don't want to sound cheesy and say love 1,000 times, but love stories are beautiful and they end with people living happily ever after, as illogical as that might be in this universe that we really live in. But it's nice to see it in our storytelling. So for him to be a satisfied, happy person at the end and live to old age, because, he didn't get that chance. He sacrificed everything, and then got frozen for 75 years or however long he got frozen for. So he never even got the chance. So actually see him dancing at the end, I thought it was a really nice way to say, period, end of movie. I don't know how else they could have done it. And the fact that it kind of goes back to Age of Ultron, where Scarlet Witch is doing all those things and they're having all their fantasies, and that's where Tony sees Thanos taking over and everybody dying, and
Mm-hmm.
then you see him with Peggy and it doesn't work out and stuff like that. So I think it's the same music actually that's happening in that fantasy of Captain America that's playing at the end of in games, and but yet this is the way it should have happened. So once again, the Russo brothers have reminded us where we've been by ending with something that should have happened, by reminding us of something that did happen.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's wrap it up. I agree with you on the end. I don't think there's any kind of a paradox with Captain America. They do explain it all. He even takes Mjolnir back with him to return it because people are saying, "What happened? That means that Thor's not gonna have the hammer." No, he's taking it back to the exact moment that they took it from. So all that checks out. I think, from a time travel standpoint, I think they checked all the boxes there. And I thought that the him spending his life with Peggy was perfect. It's a great ending, and it's better in a lot of ways. It's a nice, having both of them die at the end of the movie in battle would not have had as much emotional impact, I don't think, as the way that each of their Iron Man and Captain America, having both of them die at the end, wouldn't have had as much emotional impact as what it had in this version. So I was happy with it, and I think that the bongs at the end of the movie were just kind of like an homage to the first Iron Man, to say kind of like from humble beginnings started this huge is what we got this huge thing from. And also saying that, like, I think also it's kind of like them saying, like, we didn't know this was going to work, in the same way that Tony Stark is in a cave just finding pieces of metal and like kludging things together and hoping to God he's not going to burn himself up. They didn't know if it was going to work or not. Look at the previous Marvel movies, or previous iterations that never worked. There was a Captain America in like 1991 that was just a piece of junk. And so all these things, they didn't know. There was no precedent for this, and they just made it work. And so I think that's kind of them kind of maybe giving themselves a pat on the back.
I agree. I just feel happy to have been part of it. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
to
Like I feel
experience it.
happy yeah, it's satisfying to me.
Mm-hmm.
It feels complete.
Yep.
And I am glad I've invested time in these characters, and
Me too.
they treated us smartly. And if they are smart in the future with all of these things that fans were saying they wanted to happen, time travel and the father, and going back and seeing Jane again, and all of these things, if they follow what people want, then and they sew it together so smartly like they did, I mean, whatever's the next phase, I'm sure it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
I like the fact that you said that the clanking, the metal sound at the end is just a reminder of what humble beginnings this started with, and that the fact that we didn't know it was going to work, or they didn't know it was going to work, and then it ends with us feeling like we're part of something that really doesn't exist, but we feel like it does. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. All right. Well, you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer, and you can tweet us at actorengineer. We'll see you next time.